For decades, in towns and cities across the UK, a quiet storm was growing. One formed not just in the shadows of criminality, but in the silences of institutions. The 2024 National Audit laid it bare. Beneath the headlines and inquiries, beneath the outrage and resignations, lies a simple truth. The system tasked with protecting the vulnerable failed not once, but repeatedly, systematically, and in ways that allowed widespread harm to persist in plain sight. This audit is not just a catalogue of wrongdoing, it is a mirror to the state of the country's collective conscience. The term group-based exploitation refers to one of the most complex and hidden forms of wrongdoing against the most vulnerable, typically involving manipulation, coercion, and exploitation by multiple individuals against those who are often underage, in care, or living through deep emotional and financial instability. What sets this issue apart is not only the scale or horror of the events, but the painful reality that many of those in authority knew, and when they knew, they didn't act, or worse, they actively looked away. This wasn't about isolated bad apples. The audit uncovers repeated failures across law enforcement, social care, educational institutions, and local authorities. In some cases, frontline staff raised the alarm again and again, only to be ignored or punished for speaking up. Others simply did not understand what they were seeing, or did not want to. Young people, mostly girls but also boys, would show clear signs of grooming, sudden changes in behaviour, unexplained money or gifts, sexually explicit language, withdrawal, episodes of running away. These patterns became so common in certain local authorities that they were dismissed as just the way these kids behave. Labels like promiscuous, streetwise, or troubled were used, not as descriptors, but as shields to avoid responsibility. Instead of safeguarding, many services criminalised the victims. Perhaps most disturbing is the audit's account of missed opportunities. Time and again, individuals known to be involved in targeting minors were allowed to continue operating due to lack of coordination between agencies. Intelligence was lost in bureaucracy, referrals were never followed up, meetings were held, reports were filed, boxes were ticked, but no real action was taken. The offenders became emboldened, the young people became resigned. The community, or at least the parts of it with power, remained silent. One aspect the audit had to address, and which proved politically and socially explosive, was the pattern of certain community links among offender networks in specific cases. While the report made clear that individuals from all backgrounds have committed such crimes, it also acknowledged the unique failures that occurred when professionals felt unable to investigate for fear of being labelled discriminatory. In effect, safeguarding took a back seat to reputational management. Children were not believed, or worse, told explicitly that pursuing their allegations would cause tension. This is not a criticism of any one ethnic or cultural group, but rather a searing indictment of how institutions failed to uphold one standard of protection for all, regardless of who the suspects were. The audit also documents how many of these young victims were caught in cycles that extended beyond the immediate exploitation. Many had been in the care system or were missing regular adult support. Once the abuse ended, if it ended, the trauma did not. PTSD, substance misuse, self-injury, and repeated episodes of running away became common. In the most tragic cases, some individuals lost their lives through indirect consequences, addiction, unsafe relationships, or untreated mental health crises. These are not just side effects, they are part of the cost of long-term institutional neglect. The response from various agencies after these revelations has ranged from apology to reform. But the audit paints a grim picture. Too many authorities are still not equipped to identify and act on early warning signs. Safeguarding boards are underfunded, training is inconsistent, cultural awareness and trauma-informed approaches are not standardized. In some areas, victim-blaming attitudes still persist. In one shocking example, a survivor was asked by a professional why she kept going back to her abuser? She was 13. The audit also addressed the issue of justice. Conviction rates remain low for group-based exploitation compared to the scale of offending. Many survivors feel the justice system re-traumatizes them through cross-examination tactics, lack of psychological support, or delays stretching years. Some never report at all, having seen others silenced, dismissed, or punished. The trauma doesn't end at disclosure. In some ways, it begins there. Survivors spoke of losing faith not only in law enforcement, but in the idea that protection even exists. Still, among the darkness are stories of extraordinary courage. Survivors who came forward despite threats, whistleblowers who risked careers to expose failures, grassroots support workers who held broken lives together when official channels didn't. But these individual acts should never have been the front line. It should have been the system itself. The audit calls for sweeping changes, multi-agency safeguarding units with shared data, mandatory trauma training across all child-facing services, and, crucially, an approach that sees young victims not as delinquents or liabilities, but as people in need of relentless, unconditional support. It demands that leaders take ownership, that silence is no longer an option, that protection is not negotiable. To truly address this national wound, the conversation must be as nuanced as it is unflinching. Yes, community dynamics matter. Yes, systemic bias, including unconscious fear of political consequences, played a role in these failures. But so did austerity, institutional burnout, and decades of underfunding services meant to be the first line of defense. No one factor can explain the full scope of this disaster. It took a network of inaction, denial, and delay. The legacy of this audit must be action, not just policy, not just press statements, real change, real funding, real accountability, and most of all, belief in those who speak their truth, no matter how uncomfortable it makes us. Because the ultimate measure of a society is how it treats its most vulnerable, not just in theory, but in practice. In closing, the truth uncovered within this national audit is not simply a set of disturbing statistics or a list of historical errors. It is a moral indictment. What the report exposes is a deeply rooted failure of institutions, a failure not of information or awareness, but of action. For years, a vulnerable population, children in care, those on the edge of society, young people desperate for safety, were ignored, labelled, and left to be targeted by organised networks of exploitation. Some were betrayed not just by their abusers, but by the very people and systems meant to protect them. The failures were not occasional, they were systemic. Repeated warnings were overlooked, concerns were dismissed, staff were undertrained, overwhelmed, or frightened into silence. Local authorities fell into patterns of denial. Law enforcement missed crucial chances. In some cases, professionals were more concerned about optics, public backlash, or political correctness than with the clear, urgent need to act. That is not safeguarding, that is abandonment. Perhaps most heartbreakingly, the victims themselves, many of them mere children, were made to feel responsible for what was done to them, criminalized, mislabeled, sometimes even punished. Their trauma was not believed, their pain was minimized, and while headlines have come and gone, many of those survivors now live with lifelong consequences, fractured trust, unhealed trauma, and a justice system that still feels distant and unsafe. So what happens next? The audit offers recommendations, from better interagency cooperation to trauma-informed training. But will these words be turned into action? Will leaders accept the cost of change, even if it challenges their reputation or budget? Will the silence that allowed this to grow finally be broken? Or will we see another generation of vulnerable lives forgotten? Now, to you, the audience. What does it say about a society when its most at-risk young people are repeatedly let down by every level of protection? How do we rebuild trust in institutions that have ignored pain for so long? Is justice still possible? And if so, what does it truly look like for survivors? And most importantly, how many more must suffer before action outweighs denial? The audit may have ended, but the reckoning has only just begun.